Divine whispers. Do you hear them sometimes, just as you're going to sleep, or waking up, or perhaps suddenly as you become involved in a task and your mind has begun to drift a bit? We must listen to these whispers as we begin to change our perceptions, our core beliefs of the framework of reality. And we must snatch them from the air as they're breathed about our ears and pin them to paper before they fade like morning dreams. We do this by acknowledging them, and once we realize that they aren't an unformed errant thought, but rather often the beginning of an answer we seek, then the hard part is done. Then we must only stand ready to receive them and capture their points one way or another, like rainwater before it sinks into the earth. We must integrate them until our world becomes their world. We must gather these intuitions and practice them like an athlete hones his skills, for this is how they come into being and establish themselves here. This is how they're born and make their home in our world. But we're often afraid of these changes, not being able to see where they come from, much less where they're headed. And they can be very different from the reality we know, from the world we cling to. And even when we conquer our fear, we are often unsuccessful at progressing along these whispered paths. Though we long to make the whispers reality, we can't seem to push the right buttons within ourselves to make them fact. And try as we might, we find ourselves lapsing back into our current models and processes. We're like mice, trained to run a maze. But what happens when the mouse somehow glimpses that there is more than the maze, like we do when we recognize and capture these whispers of truth? What then must the mouse do to abandon his learned responses that insist he go left and then right and then left again? Because that's what he's learned to do by painful trial and error. But what happens when he questions where this bit of cheese comes from? When does this happen? The mouse must first somehow realize that he is indeed following a learned pattern, and furthermore, he must make the leap that if it's a learned pattern, then it goes without saying that it cannot be the only pattern. By seeing that he is running a pattern, he gains the ability to change this pattern. Do you see? By questioning, he opens this door. So first, through one way or another, we must become aware of our conditioned responses, these patterns that we are running without questioning. When we see this as a learned pattern based upon a certain set of conditions and experiences, then it opens the door to question whether or not there are other patterns to run, or even if we can build a new world, one that does not run only from default patterns and programs, but perhaps one that awaits our conscious direction in the now. I think we do this all the time, just unconsciously. So how do we change this? How do we make the switch from unconscious to conscious? First, we must become aware of what we respond to. Now, no one panic, but I'm going to use a few biblical metaphors in this video because, interpreted correctly, they lend themselves very well to the things I would like to point to. But please don't view them as religious references. So, religious disclaimer aside, if we look closely, we see that in the Bible, some are healed by having something done to them, like when Jesus spit on the ground and made mud and applied it to the eyes of the blind man. After this, the man had to act on his faith that he would be healed by following directions and going to a specific body of water and washing off the mud. Now, of course, the mud held no healing properties of its own, and neither did the water. Their only purpose was to satisfy this man's need to believe something had been done to him. And it was his need being met that pressed this button of belief. And then to make this new belief come to be, to integrate it into his world, he had to act upon his new belief. It was his new belief that had successfully entered his awareness through his actions that made his healing a reality. And this is most common for us, which is also why Jesus marveled when a leader of the group of Roman soldiers came to him and asked him to heal his sick servant. And as Jesus turned to accompany the man to the sick servant, the man stopped and explained that he understood it wasn't necessary for Jesus to go physically with him to heal his servant, that just his word would be enough. And he further explained that his soldiers went here and there and did his bidding without the captain accompanying them, so he understood that specific physical gestures were not necessary to accomplish things. And Jesus marveled at this man's awareness, saying that he had yet to meet anyone who grasped this so deeply. And Jesus told the man, "As you believe, so will it be done." And the man's servant was healed. And so how it happens depends upon us. Some of us do better with props, for lack of a better word, with mud over our eyes and instructions to wash in certain waters. These actions are stepping stones for us, allowing us to achieve these things and activating our belief. But it's easy to get stuck here, to never see any further to what's actually happening here. And I hope this video does that today. To directly modify our reality, some of us may be at the stage where only the belief, the thought, is necessary, while others may do better with physical props and triggers. Be sure to begin with whatever applies to you, whichever you respond to best at this time. But the first thing that must happen is to recognize the possibility that things could work out differently and not continue to follow the expected pattern or default program. And this is what the people were doing who came to Jesus to be healed. They sincerely entertained the possibility that a default pattern could be modified and that a miracle could happen. This was evident in their coming to him. And perhaps that's what you're doing here today as you take time out of your busy day to listen to these words. Perhaps you are at the point where you are beginning to believe this can happen. I hope so, because this is the first step. You must sincerely entertain the possibility that the expected pattern or default programs that are currently running can be changed and replaced with different patterns. That is step 1. Please join me in part 2 of Divine Whispers.